Dr. Leeser,
Yes.
thanks for meeting me today. I was just after being in Perrysburg. Got a client that wants to set up a medical marijuana dispensary, so I don't do that.
That would be my father. No.
Well, anyway, my time is kind of limited. I do have another appointment, and I know you have patients to see. But you'll recall we asked you to do an examination of a couple of different employees of different companies. Jim Wolverine for staffing agency Maize and Blue, and then we had to do an exam for Jim Beam for a company called Scarlet and Gray.
Yes.
Okay. And I have a copy of your report, and I just wanted to talk to you to discuss some of your opinions, because it's interesting to me, and also when one of the attorneys from my office goes to argue this, it's going to be important for them to kind of understand the basis underlying your opinion, okay?
All right.
All right. So let's talk about marijuana. You're aware that, from the examination and the records we provided you, that Joe Wolverine had some marijuana in his system, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And you're also aware that marijuana, at least on some levels now, legal in Ohio?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that the legalization of marijuana doesn't really affect how the workers' comp system operates?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's my understanding that a urine screen can show marijuana at certain levels, and under Ohio law, if it's above 50 nanograms per milliliter, that's a level over which intoxication is presumed. Are you familiar with the law?
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about that. Can you explain to me what are the different kind of tests for marijuana, and which ones most commonly used?
Sure. Well, you can test for any substance of abuse, whether it's marijuana or cocaine. Mostly it's done with urine specimens. We do hair testing. You can test saliva. You can scrape the keratin from fingernails and test that. But mostly the matrix is urine. And the initial testing is done, it's called a screening test, because there's several compounds that can mimic, because of their structure, it can look a lot like marijuana metabolite. And so the least expensive approach is to do the screening test with what's called an ELISA test, an enzyme-linked immunoassay test. And it looks at the general structure of marijuana, and again, other compounds can mimic that appearance, but the level is established at 50 so as to eliminate the potential for perhaps secondhand smoke exposure. You know, if we just limit this discussion to marijuana, there's several compounds that can look like marijuana on that screening test, but if it's over 50, there's a reasonable chance that it was marijuana itself or one of its metabolites that caused that test to be positive. So the laboratories, once they screen the urine specimen and they identify marijuana, they will then do a confirmation test, which is kind of like looking at the fingerprint. Every substance that we encounter in life has got a specific chemical structure, and the marijuana metabolite is no exception to that. And so the gas chromatography mass spectrometry test is one that identifies the specific fingerprint of one specific metabolite of marijuana, and typically that is the delta-9 THC tetrahydrocannabinoid. It's one metabolite. There's several that you could use. The industry established delta-9 THC as the one that they were going to use. So that level cutoff is 15 nanograms per ml. And again, these cutoffs were established to eliminate the possibility that you could have some secondhand exposure that could cause it. So in other words, you had to actually use the substance intentionally to get it to at least 15 nanograms or higher.
So in this case, Joe Wolverine had his urine tested for marijuana or other drugs, and it showed that his level was 250 nanograms per milliliter, which I guess would be 5 times the screening level. And he had this done within a few hours, it seems like, of the accident. Can you explain to me why is the timing of the test important?
Yeah, that was pretty high. The number that is typically reported back from the laboratory is not the screening number, but the confirmation number. So the initial screen is done, that's positive, then they confirm for that specific metabolite. So the 25 is actually, well, what's 15 into 250? It's a lot. It's almost 20 times the cutoff for delta-9 THC. When it's that high, if I had a chalkboard, I could explain it to you, but just imagine it's like shooting a bottle rocket up in the air. It reaches a peak and then it comes down, all right? So when the marijuana is initially smoked, it enters into the body through the lungs, then it's absorbed into the bloodstream and it's transported throughout the body. It has its psychotropic impact on the central nervous system as it enters the circulation of the brain, but it eventually circulates through the liver where it's metabolized and broken down and then eliminated actually through a lot of matrices. It's you'll find it in hair, you'll find it in nails, you'll find it in saliva, but we use urine because it's the most easily and readily accessible sample method. And by the time it starts to be eliminated into the urine, it usually starts to show within maybe 15, 20 minutes after use. And like that bottle rocket going up, the fuse has been lit, you're going to see it go higher and higher. And at some point, you hit a peak, and then that, like the bottle rocket, the marijuana metabolite begins to decline. That peak of excretion usually occurs within the first 2 to 4 hours after use of the substance. And we have no witness statement that says that Joe Wolverine continued to use marijuana after the accident, so we have to assume that the level that was identified was the result of use before the accident. Okay. The sample was obtained a couple hours after the accident, so the timing is, we don't know when he used it or how much he used, but the level that was identified was typical for that post-excretion peak level that comes out when after the initial use. So the 250 is significant because it indicates that he had just recently used sometime in the last few hours.
And you said that his level was really, really high. So what, in terms of his behavior and the kinds of signs you would expect for someone with this level of marijuana in their system, what would you expect to find? What does that mean?
Well, you've never been to a rock concert, I guess.
Well, let's not go there.
So the anticipation is this high sensation, this liberating ease of mind that so many people talk about. But marijuana is a hallucinogen, and as such, it distorts your sensory input. I always go back to the old Beatles albums where they had all these colors, the Magical Mystery Tour, and it was a result of somewhat of their substance abuse too. It alters, it makes colors brighter, it makes sounds more unusual, it makes sensory input just distorted, and in some cases pleasurably so, but it does alter sensory input. So that's what you get with the effect of marijuana, in addition to the appetite stimulation and some of the other things that happens with chronic use.
Well, we didn't find any crackers around the incident site, but so we don't know that he was snacking. But let's get past the munchies part. As far as causation is concerned, there was an issue in this case as to what caused the accident. And obviously, when two tow motors collide, you can say the tow motor crash is what caused his foot to be crushed. But we provided you with witness statements. We provided you with the owner's manual of the forklift as well as like the safety records and how they're to be operated. How did all that play into your opinion on causation of the accident and whether or not intoxication played a role in that?
Well, interesting, Mark, you did not give me the statement from the young lady who had actually used marijuana with Joe Wolverine a half hour before the accident. That would have been the nail in the coffin, as they say. But it's obvious that it alters your behavior. It causes you to take risks because your sensory input is distorted. You're dealing with the real world. You're dealing with an altered perception of the real world. And so your judgment is going to be impaired. You know people that get drunk, they're either a happy drunk or a quiet drunk or a mean drunk, but it changes their behavior in one way or another. Well, marijuana working on the central nervous system alters behavior as well, thus the risk-taking behavior. As you mentioned, I did review the instruction manual for the stand-up forklift, and you have to be a contortionist to be able to run the forklift and dangle your foot outside the forklift, but that had to be what had happened, because as soon as, there's two controls on the floor there, one for the gas and one for the brake, you have to have your left heel on the brake. As soon as your heel leaves that brake, the forklift comes to a gradual halt. And so for his foot to have left the forklift and get crushed, the forklift should have stopped long before it came into contact with the other forklift. So it was obvious that what he was doing was intentionally defeating the safety mechanism of that forklift. Again, risk-taking behavior.
Okay. Now, it was also found that he had opiates in his system, and I believe the level was 2,800 nanograms per milliliter. The statute, workers' comp statute, provides a cutoff level at 2,000 nanograms per milliliter, above which you would be presumed to be intoxicated. Can you tell me about that level of intoxication, 2,800 nanograms per milliliter, and what that means in terms of intoxication also?
I'm impressed, Mark. You say it like a real scientist. Again, like with marijuana, the opiate cutoff is established to eliminate the possibility of false positives from, say, casual use of poppy seed, as we might have in a bagel or coffee cake. So once it's elevated above the cutoff level, and with the opiates, we screen at 2,000 and we also confirm at 2,000, looking for the screening test. Again, is an ELISA type test method that uses enzyme-linked immunoassay techniques to amplify signals. And bottom line is it's a different type of test, but when we confirm, again, we're looking at a specific metabolite that has its own fingerprint that shows up on GCMS. I keep calling it a fingerprint, but if you look at the GCMS tracing, it's a bunch of bars, and it's not a fingerprint. But the point is it's specific to that metabolite. And so when you're above that certainly indicates use, not casual or passive use, but intentional use of the substance. We also know that opiates also impair central nervous system function. They cause sedation. They'll reduce attention, and they obviously relieve pain too, because their ability to attach to the opiate receptors in the brain. So you get that effect, but the mechanism by which people die from opiate use is from a host of things, but one of those is respiratory arrest, because it affects respiration control in the central nervous system. So it can have a profound effect. And the sedation, the obtunded effect of opiate would serve to certainly augment the altered effect of the central nervous system from the marijuana. So you have two substances that are working in different ways, but the ultimate effect is a significantly impaired individual.
All right. I just got a text from my assistant that they're delivering cookies. So I only have a couple more quick questions for you. Jim Beam also tested positive for opiates. He had a prescription, though, and his level was 10,000 nanograms per milliliter. Despite the fact that he had a prescription, what does this tell you about his level of intoxication?
Well, it's hard to compare one person to another. We all react differently to the same input. So the one medicine in one person could have a totally different impact on another person. But what it does tell us again, though, is that there's been recent use of the opiate by Jim Beam.
Okay. Now, lastly, one of the issues, assuming that a hearing officer doesn't knock this claim out on the grounds of intoxication or some other legal basis, let's say we have to deal with the substantial aggravation of the left ankle arthritis. The ER report showed that Joe Wolverine had crush injuries to his toes, okay,
Yes.
And also to the forefoot. But there didn't appear to be much of an injury to the ankle, or at least not to the medial aspect, which is where he complained. Explain to me why you found, despite the fact that there was an x-ray on this, explain to me why you don't believe there was substantial aggravation of that ankle arthritis.
Sure. Well, the substantial aggravation of a pre-existing condition requires that there be some interval change in the status of that pre-existing condition in relation to the event that we're talking about. So in this case, the tow motor accident, the x-rays that were taken in the emergency room showed degenerative changes, minor, but some degenerative changes in the ankle, but nothing acute. In other words, no sign of fracture, no soft tissue swelling that showed up on x-ray. He later had an MRI done that failed to show any acute changes either. On MRI, we see different things, but we can get very good detail of the soft tissue structures on an MRI. We can also obtain information about the bone structures of the MRI. You can see things such as bone bruising that would suggest some recent acute event. But to have a substantial aggravation of an arthritic condition, and arthritis on an x-ray is going to show things like joint space narrowing, where cartilage has been worn down and you have narrowing of the joint space because the cartilage is absent. It'll show bone spurring. We'll also oftentimes see subchondral cysts form in the bone itself below where the cartilage would be. Those things show up on MRI as well, but you're looking for an interval change. So I didn't have access to previous x-rays, but had there been x-rays, there would have been evidence of the presence of those arthritis changes. So to say that there's been substantial aggravation of that pre-existing condition, we need to see some interval change in the swelling, the fluid content. The MRI would show perhaps tearing of thin cartilage that associated with fluid collection at the site of torn cartilage. Those sorts of things might suggest an interval change that would correlate to, that would support a substantial aggravation. In the absence of any of those acute findings, what we saw on MRI was just manifestation of the chronic degenerative changes that we also saw on x-ray.
Well, you know, I appreciate your time, Doctor. If you have a couple minutes, why don't you join me for a cookie?
Sure, it'll cost you though.
Okay, all right, thank you.